of Northfield, Vermont, nestled among thick forests and rolling hills, held an ominous secret. The legend of the Pigman was whispered among the townsfolk, a tale of terror passed down through generations. They spoke of a creature, half man, half pig, that lurked in the woods, emerging under the cover of darkness to hunt those who dared venture too close. John Stevens, a new resident, had recently moved to Northfield to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. He had bought an old, isolated farmhouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense forest. Despite the warnings from his neighbors about the Pigman, John dismissed the stories as mere folklore. One crisp autumn evening, John decided to explore the woods behind his property. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of adventure, he set out along a narrow trail that wound through the trees. The air was cool, and the forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. As John ventured deeper, he noticed strange markings on the trees, deep, claw-like gouges that seemed too large to be made by any ordinary animal. A shiver ran down his spine, but he pressed on, determined to enjoy his new surroundings. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. John checked his watch, realizing he had been walking for hours. He turned to head back but found himself disoriented, the path seeming unfamiliar. Panic set in as the darkness closed in around him. Suddenly, he heard it, a low, guttural grunt echoing through the trees. His heart pounded as he swung his flashlight wildly, trying to locate the source of the sound. The beam of light caught a glimpse of movement, and John's blood ran cold. Standing just beyond the reach of his flashlight was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was tall and hunched, covered in coarse hair, with a grotesque face that was a horrific blend of human and pig. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, and its snout twitched as it sniffed the air. John stumbled backward, his mind racing. The Pigman took a step forward, its eyes never leaving John. He turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature's grunts grew louder, closer, as it pursued him through the forest. Desperate, John spotted an old, abandoned barn in a clearing and sprinted towards it, throwing himself inside. He slammed the door shut and braced it with a broken piece of wood. The barn was dark and musty, filled with old farming tools and decaying hay bales. The Pigman's grunts echoed outside, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. John's mind raced as he searched for a weapon, his eyes falling on an old pitchfork. He grabbed it, holding it tightly as he backed into a corner, his flashlight flickering. The door creaked open, and the Pigman stepped inside, its eyes locking onto John. The creature let out a horrifying squeal and lunged. John thrust the pitchfork forward, but the Pigman swatted it aside effortlessly, sending him sprawling to the ground. In a final, desperate attempt to save himself, John scrambled for a large, rusted scythe leaning against the wall. As the Pigman closed in, he swung the scythe with all his might. The blade caught the creature across its snout, and it let out a deafening roar of pain and rage. But it was not enough. The pigman recovered quickly, its eyes blazing with fury. With a swift, brutal motion, it grabbed John and threw him across the barn. John hit the wall with a sickening thud, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. The pigman approached, its eyes filled with a sinister, almost sadistic glee. John's vision blurred, his strength waning. He tried to crawl away, but the pigman was upon him. The last thing John saw was the creature's grotesque face looming over him, its sharp tusks glinting in the dim light. The town of Northfield awoke the next morning to the news of John's disappearance. Search parties were organized, and the woods were combed thoroughly. All they found were torn pieces of John's clothing and deep, claw-like marks on the trees. The legend of the pigman grew stronger, the tale of John Stevens becoming another cautionary story to warn newcomers and children alike. The townsfolk knew the truth. The pigman was no mere legend, and the woods of Northfield held a dark and terrifying secret. And in the shadows of the forest, the pigman waited, ever watchful, ready to strike again when the next unsuspecting soul ventured too close.